This is CBN NewsWatch.
And thank you so much for joining us for the program. I'm Ephraim Graham. President Trump says he does not believe sexual misconduct allegations against his Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh, including a new claim that developed over the weekend. Our Amber Strong has this update from our Washington bureau.
Just as Senate Republicans were reaching a compromise with one woman accusing Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh of sexual assault, news of a second allegation. According to this report in The New Yorker, 53-year-old Deborah Ramirez says Kavanaugh exposed himself and caused her to touch his bare genitals when the two were freshmen at Yale. Ramirez says she was hesitant to come forward, saying she, Kavanaugh, and others at the party were heavily intoxicated at the time. But, quote, after 6 days of carefully assessing her memories and consulting with her attorney, she felt confident enough of her recollections. That has some critics raising questions. The New Yorker report highlights various people who Ramirez says were there when the incident happened. One person Ramirez says egged Kavanaugh on denies even remembering the party. Another male classmate Ramirez says was involved says he doesn't remember it. And others who knew Kavanaugh closely as a freshman also dispute her story. Still, others support her claims and her credibility. Kavanaugh flat out denies the incident, saying the allegations are a smear, plain and simple. The president strongly defended his nominee Monday, while also questioning the political process.
I think it could be, there's a chance that this could be one of the single most unfair, unjust things to happen to a candidate for anything. But I am with Judge Kavanaugh, and I look forward to a vote.
This comes just one day after Senate Republicans reached a tentative deal to have Kavanaugh's first accuser, Christine Ford, testify before the Senate Judiciary Thursday. Amber Strong, CBN News.
And Regent University Law School professor Brad Jacobs joins us now to talk about this story and explore it even more. So first, your take on these latest developments.
Well, you never want to take allegations of sexual abuse or misconduct lightly. You know, the Me Too movement is important. Many women have suffered. But the problem in cases like this is you can't let someone be destroyed by an allegation that can't be proven, whether it's sexual misconduct or an allegation that he stole a bicycle or that he, ran a red light. Any kind of allegation, if it's nothing more than one person said, you have to say, even though this is important, we've got to look for proof. We've got to look for some evidence supporting the story.
That said, we've got two allegations. How should the Judiciary Committee handle these accusations?
Well, I think they need to bring the accusers in and hear them. And if there is anything that can support their stories, that needs to be brought forward. So far, we know the most about Dr. Ford's allegations, and there isn't anything as of yet to corroborate it. She's placed two other witnesses on the site, and they both deny it. Nothing contemporaneous has happened that supports her story. So the Senate committee needs to do as much digging as it can to see if there are facts.
Now, some conservatives have pointed to Congressman Keith Ellison. He's a Democrat running for Minnesota Attorney General. He's got claims against him, including a woman with pictures and evidence and police reports, some say, but Democrats are not looking to investigate him. Double standard here?
Well, honestly, most of the political people in Washington tend to react differently to things depending on which side it is. And probably most of the American people tend to react differently to things depending on what side it is. If President Obama does something and President Trump does something, your political feelings may respond. So I don't know that that's a huge deal. They're very different circumstances. Mr. Ellison is not a nominee to be on the Supreme Court. And even if that's wrongdoing on the part of the Democrats, it doesn't really answer the question of whether there's a problem with Kavanaugh.
What precedent do you think this sets for future nominees if Kavanaugh's nomination is derailed in light of what the witnesses are saying but no clear evidence?
I think it's a very, very bad precedent if there is no evidence and the Supreme Court nomination is brought down simply on the basis of unsubstantiated allegations, because what we would expect is that both parties will start playing that game, and you can always find someone who will come in and say something. And so we may never get another Supreme Court justice through if it's decided that you don't need proof. All you need is one person saying there's wrongdoing.
David Brody tweeted from Kavanaugh's letter, "The vile threats of violence against my family will not drive me out. The last-minute character assassination will not succeed." Your thoughts on this tweet from our colleague covering this?
Well, you know, Justice Kavanaugh is putting up with a lot, or Judge Kavanaugh, hopefully in his perspective, Justice Kavanaugh. It takes a lot of character to be willing to go through this process. And you have to give him credit for hanging in and being willing to subject himself to this. And all I can hope and pray is that the truth wins out. And if he really has done heinous things, that is proven and becomes known. And if he hasn't, that he's able to go on, as Clarence Thomas has, to build his career from here.
Excellent point. We all want truth to bear out. Thank you so much. Brad Jacobs with the Regent University Law School. Rumors swirled on news outlets about Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein's future in the Justice Department. He had a meeting at the White House this afternoon with Chief of Staff John Kelly and attended a previously scheduled cabinet meeting. He requested a meeting with the president when the president is back in Washington later this week. The rumors began after a report Rosenstein suggested to now former acting FBI Director Andrew McCabe that he wear a wire when meeting with the president. Most advisors to the president say he should not be fired. Turkish leaders are hinting American pastor Andrew Brunson could be released next month at his hearing on October 12th if the U.S. stops putting pressure on the country. Brunson is currently under house arrest after spending almost 2 years in a Turkish prison accused of crimes related to his Christian faith. His daughter spoke at the Values Voters Summit in Washington and says it's been difficult for her dad and their family.
I'll say there are times when I'm not necessarily happy with God's plan in this situation, but I've really come to realize that God is in complete control and He has a plan, and this is all for His glory. He is worth everything that my family has gone through, and I've seen that message coming through in letters from my dad as well, as he has started to transform and really submit to God and say, God, my life is yours. Whatever you do with me, let it honor you, let it declare your name and your goodness to people. And I am
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo also spoke at the event and says the United States is sparing no effort to see Brunson returned home safely. Hurricane Florence is by no means done with the Carolinas, where some rivers are still rising and thousands of people were told to plan to leave their homes on Monday before rivers reach their crest. While hundreds of smaller roads remain impassable, there was some good news. Interstate 95 was reopened to all traffic Sunday night for the first time since the floods. According to state leaders, at least 6,000 to 8,000 people are under alert for potential flooding in South Carolina as late as Tuesday along several rivers. Wildfires are creating more problems in California. One exploded in size overnight and threatened more families and homes. It is the fastest moving brush fire firefighters are calling Charlie. It is raging north of Los Angeles, moving from 3,000 to 3,000 acres of danger and damage. It triggered mandatory evacuations, and rapidly expanding fire created massive amounts of smoke that could be seen for miles. More than 100 firefighters are attacking it on the ground and by air, but this fire is still not contained. Dallas police say a white officer accused of shooting and killing her black neighbor inside his own apartment has been dismissed. The Dallas Police Department fired Officer Amber Geiger on Monday, weeks after she shot and killed 26-year-old Botham Jean inside his own apartment on September 6th. Court records show Geiger said she thought she had encountered a burglar inside her own home. Geiger was arrested on a preliminary charge of manslaughter days after the shooting. She is free on bond at this hour. Jean's family's attorneys and protesters had called for her firing following the shooting. Is your direct deposit at risk to cyber criminals? Could be. The FBI has received complaints it's happening and is warning you to be careful. It reports cyber criminals are sending phishing emails to your work email addresses to help them get your employee credentials and then to access your payroll account with your employer and change your bank account to theirs. The FBI is warning employers to make their employees aware this is happening and encourages employees to question any email asking for this information. You can find out more at our website, that is cbnnews.com. Transgender and gender diverse, or TGD, children are getting further recognition by the American Academy of Pediatrics. It is releasing new guidelines in October to ensure comprehensive care and support. The policy outlines treatments, care, and support for children and their family that the Academy says focuses on promoting the health and positive development of young people who identify as TGD, while also eliminating discrimination and stigma. The report says in its gender affirmation care model, it helps doctors and healthcare providers to offer developmentally appropriate care geared at appreciating the youth's gender experience. Coming up, President Trump is set to visit the United Nations this week, what he could face following his decision to defund the UN's relief group, which supports Palestinians. The story's next. And welcome back to CBN NewsWatch. President Trump addresses the United Nations General Assembly this week. His visit comes on the heels of his decision to cut funding to UNRWA, that is the United Nations Relief and AIDS Work Agency, the UN body responsible for Palestinian refugees. CBN's Chris Mitchell reports on why critics of UNRWA say it could be encouraging a new generation of terrorists.
This lady with a Palestinian scarf appears harmless, right?
But who is this? Dalal al-Mughrabi, who led a terrorist attack and murdered 38 people, including 13 children, on the coastal road of Israel in 1978.
Her picture appears in the 5th grade Arabic language textbook. It's part of a 4-page lesson that hails Mughrabi as a martyr who painted with her struggle a picture of challenge and heroism.
In these 4 pages, they're praising her and saying what a hero she was and how the younger generation needs to act exactly the same as she did.
Israeli Knesset members Sharon Haskell and David Bedin of the Israel Resource News Agency spoke to journalists about reforms they believe need to happen.
Some of the major problems with UNRWA are perpetuating the hatred and the violence between Palestinians and Israelis.
CBN News asked UNRWA about the textbooks and education system. In a written statement, spokesman Christopher Gunnis told us UNRWA teaches in accordance with UN values and principles. By convention, we teach the curriculum of host countries, i.e. the PA curriculum in the occupied territory. We review every book we use. We check for gender bias, age appropriateness, and political neutrality. On average, we found less than 3% of the pages we have reviewed to be problematic. There are 515,000 Palestinian children in the UNRWA school system. Bedin says that if just 2% take up the challenge to terrorism each year, that would create more than 10,000 terrorists. Bedin sees other issues with UNRWA.
UNRWA, as a policy, teaches the concept of the right of return by force of arms.
That so-called right of return is also exaggerated by the very definition of Palestinian refugees.
UNRWA's got a completely different refugee definition than any other international organization. In UNRWA, a refugee status can be inherited, which means that they do not fulfill their basic agenda for what they were created for.
Haskell and Bedin hope that President Trump's action to cut funding will force UNRWA to make changes. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
America's UN ambassador Nikki Haley is standing up to Iran in its claims the United States is responsible for an attack on the country over the weekend. She says the U.S. is not to blame for a terrorist attack on Iran during its annual military parade. Iran's President Rouhani blamed the U.S., but Haley said this, she told CNN, he should look at the problems in his own country first.
He needs to look at his own home base. He's got the Iranian people are protesting. Every ounce of money that goes into Iran goes to his military. He has oppressed his people for a long time, and he needs to look at his own base to figure out where that's coming from. I think the Iranian people have had enough, and that's where all of this is coming from. But having said that, he can blame us all he wants. The thing he's got to do is look in the mirror.
Haley also says Iran's economy is plummeting after President Donald Trump pulled out of the nuclear deal earlier this year. Venezuela's social and economic problems continue to take their toll on the country's health services, and the situation in the country's hospitals is heartbreaking. Our senior international correspondent Dale Hurd is on this story.
At San Cristobal Hospital in Táchira State, only emergency cases are being admitted, and people have to buy their own medicines, bandages, and gloves. Some patients are forced to wait in stairwells for treatment that is not coming. This patient, Gloria, needs a metal pin for her leg, but she may wait up to 3 months. Because of a shortage of nurses, many patients in the hospital are being cared for by their relatives. Many of the medical personnel have left the hospital because they were unable to survive on the minimum wage they were getting, and those who are left are working for almost nothing.
Everything here is so sad. I can not help them because they need help. There is nobody here.
The hospital is almost bankrupt by the worsening economic situation in Venezuela, and parts have had to be boarded up due to lack of supplies. This 7-year-old patient has a brain tumor. There is no cancer treatment available in the country, and she is cared for by her mother, who says, "Because she's my daughter, I have to support her and do everything I can to help her. We've been here for 2 months." This boy needs antibiotics for a serious bowel problem, but they simply aren't available. His father describes the situation as a nightmare. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
And still ahead, Revival in America. We're going to show you how the Spirit of the Lord is moving in one of the oldest parts of the country. Stay with us. Here at CBN, we love to show you how God is at work in our nation. Here's our Mark Martin with one evangelist who's seeing revival in a place you might not expect.
10 Days of Prayer is an international event, a season of prayer and worship with the goal of having Jesus Christ as the focus of every heart in a city for 10 entire days. Bridgeport, Connecticut is one of the locations where it was held this year, and God moved mightily. Dexter Upshaw Jr. is the pastor of New Vision International Ministries in Bridgeport, the site of 10 Days of Prayer in that city. Talk about how 10 Days of Prayer started.
Wow, it actually started about 3 years ago. There were a group of pastors who came together under the vision of the National 10 Days of Prayer and decided that they wanted it to be in Bridgeport. It actually started out under a tent next to the ballpark here in the city. It was outdoors for about 7 days. Hundreds of people were showing up each night. And then one day the weather shifted, it got cold, the tent started shaking. And so one of my good pastor friends, Pastor Louis Burgos, said, "Hey, can we come to New Vision?" And it's kind of been here ever since for consecutive years.
What is the goal of the event?
The goal of the event is prayer. The whole premise is what happens when a city, an entire city, stops to pray. And so literally, our vision is that Bridgeport would take 10 days. It's between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. These are the days of awe according to the Jewish calendar and the Jewish New Year. And we're just going to stop and pray for transformation, pray for breakthrough, not just for individuals, but for the city as a whole.
And when we spoke earlier on the phone, you said a man got out of his wheelchair after people prayed for him. Tell us what happened.
It was an amazing sight to behold. But some things were shifting in his life, according to the testimony of his wife, and he got to a place where he wanted to come to the revivals each evening. And on the very last night, there was a group of pastors and intercessors who prayed healing over his body. And he's been wheelchair bound. He did something that he hasn't done. He stood up, but not only did he stand up, he walked about 15 feet, and he was moving his legs on his own. And he was regaining feeling in his right side of the body. And he hadn't been talking, but he could say hallelujah. And so the entire church, just erupted because, we're not doing this for shape, form, or fashion. We want to see genuine transformation. That was a sign that God had been moving and is continuing to move in our city.
Do you believe that this event in Bridgeport is a catalyst to Christian revival spreading throughout New England as a whole?
New England is definitely not the Bible Belt, but according to what we understand the history of this country, if it's not the Bible Belt, it's the belt buckle. So much started here in New England. So much revival occurred back 200, 300 years ago. And to a certain extent, New England has kind of strayed away from its original purpose. But we believe that revival is happening, and we believe it's going to start in the urban center. Bridgeport is a mosaic of cultures. As people here, with the 24 hours of prayer and 10 days of prayer, we had folks of Puerto Rican descent. We had folks of African American, African, across the diaspora, Brazil, Colombia. Bridgeport is the type of city where you find all those people in one place. Bridgeport is the largest city in the state of Connecticut. Connecticut is the richest state per capita, but the largest wealth gap in the country is between Bridgeport and Greenwich, Connecticut, which is the hedge fund capital of the world. So what we believe that God is doing is he's stirring up the hearts of people who just want to see his glory. And we believe that it's starting in Bridgeport, but it's not going to end in Bridgeport. It's going to go all up and down I-95 north and south. It's going to go to the north, to Maine and to Massachusetts. It's going to continue into New York. And we just believe that God wants to demonstrate his glory in New England, because everybody says this is the graveyard for preachers and churches, and we want to see a different report concerning our city and our region. So we're excited.
I believe with you in that vision in Jesus' name. Well, Pastor Dexter Upshaw of New Vision International Ministries, thank you for sharing today. Really appreciate your what you're doing up there and how you're yielding to God.
Coming up, actor Chris Pratt is never shy about his faith in God, and he talks about authentic faith in a recent interview. Chris Pratt recently told the Associated Press, Hollywood is pro whatever is authentic to you. He says for him, that's his faith, and he is pro-Christian and pro-Jesus. He said, nothing fills my soul more than to think that maybe some kid watching, that they would say, hey, I've been thinking about that. I've been thinking about praying. Let me try that out. The Jurassic World and Guardians of the Galaxy star says he has never had anyone in Hollywood try to shame him to his face regarding his faith. Well, remember, you can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about always at cbnnews.com. We'd love to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do that by emailing newswatch@cbn.com. You can also reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We'll see you right back here tomorrow. Bye-bye, everybody.